Welcome to the Electric Wire Podcast. We bring you news and views on the most pressing issues facing Wisconsin's electric industry, from policymakers, executives, and customer and environmental advocates. Bringing you these discussions, we are the Customers First Coalition. Here's your host, Executive Director Kristen Jilks.
Hello and welcome to the Electric Wire. This is Kristen Jilks, your host, and I am thrilled to be joined today by Cindy Smith, who is the Chief Legal Counsel at the Public Service Commission of Wisconsin. As you will hear, Cindy and I worked together over a decade ago at this point, but still consider Cindy a friend, and I'm so proud of the way she has handled herself at the commission over these years, and she is well respected by everyone she's worked with, including commissioners, elected officials, staff. Everyone who knows Cindy knows the level of professionalism she brings to the role, and I think that'll come through here. So without further ado, I will turn you over to my conversation with Cindy. Thank you, Cindy Smith, for joining us on the Electric Wire today. It is such a joy to have you here and see your face. It's been a little while, but so happy to see you. So welcome, Cindy.
Well, thank you. And thank you, Kristen, for inviting me and being able to spend a little time with you today. It's been too long.
It has been too long.
Seems like only yesterday you were in the office next to me.
Agreed. So Cindy is the Chief Legal Counsel at the Public Service Commission of Wisconsin. Many of you already know this because Cindy is a guest that we have had several people suggest reaching out to. But Cindy and I go way back. First started working together over 10 years ago now. I think it's been at least 10 years since I've been at the commission, when I was communications director and our offices were right next to each other. So I miss working next to you, Cindy. It was one of the best parts of the job and one of the best jobs I've ever had.
Same. And I always remember the time when we had the blizzard and we had to get in to start the open meeting. And I was walking in and you and I were the only ones there, and you had your snow pants on, and we basically ran a remote open meeting. Who knew back in, I think that was probably 2012 maybe, where we had to do
2012
that.
Sounds about right. Yes.
And who knew that was going to be the start of what became more routine now is Zoom and remote meetings like this.
Hybrid meetings. Exactly. I knew there was no chance we were getting through this podcast without the blizzard coming up because that was a really fun memory at the commission. Yes. And I think all of the employees at the commission are so dedicated, and especially you, Cindy. You put your heart and soul into that job, and you'd be there through thick and thin. So we all appreciate that and appreciate having your experience there over the course of 3 administrations. And maybe you could touch on that for us. Tell us a little bit more about your background and how long you've been at the commission and what you do there.
Sure. I joined the commission on August 23rd, 2010. Prior to that, I was in private practice, really starting my career in the environmental area. And I'll date myself, but when I started, environmental was sort of a new area. And so I was part of the environmental practice group at Michael Best. And through that, over my 17 plus years at Michael Best, I kind of started doing environmental work for utilities, environmental litigation for utilities. And a former partner of mine at Michael Best came to the commission and was appointed by Governor Doyle. And the position for chief counsel opened up, and she said, "You got to come work here." And so I think I had done what I wanted to do in the private sector. I had always had an interest and had been raised to really care about the community, and public service was always something very important. And so it seemed like a nice transition. I don't know that I thought I would still be here 13 plus years later, but here I am.
We're glad you are. You're irreplaceable there. We'll say that. So tell us, what are some of the biggest issues that you deal with at the PSC in your daily workflow?
Yeah, and I'll sort of give you operational and then also substantive. As chief counsel, sort of my role obviously is to make sure that the commission is complying with all of the rules and regulations applicable to our regulation of public utilities, as well as the administration of various grant programs that the commission has. And people may not be as familiar as you are with the commission, but we have 5 major investor-owned utilities, 70-some municipal electric utilities. But then we also regulate water utilities. And so we have over 500 water utilities. We have some limited telecommunications. So as chief counsel, sort of my team provides the legal support to each of those subject matters. And so I have the ability, because my team is involved, of having sort of that cross-sectional view of the agency. So it just seemed to naturally fit that I sort of took on the role of kind of administering the scheduling and process-wise, making sure we stay on track, decisions that need to go to the commission, that they're done by the statutory deadlines. So I'll say the first kind of operational challenge is just the sheer volume of work that the agency processes on a daily basis is really, truly amazing. I know, utilities kind of think, well, we only do their work, but I don't think they realize that there's so much work that gets done on a day-to-day basis by our staff that is done by the administrators and staff, and really only a fraction of that does the public hear about. And so I think just managing that, our division administrators do a fantastic job of balancing all of that. So operationally, that's certainly a challenge. The added challenge is the Public Service Commission. We also handle all of our own litigation. And so not only are we balancing the regulatory work and advising on that, we're also sometimes, engrossed in writing briefs and defending commission decisions in the state and federal courts. And that can be challenging to balance that litigation casework with the day-to-day work that needs to be done. Substantively, I think some of the biggest challenge, and hopefully we'll talk more about this, is there's been such a change in the industry, yet the statutes by which public utilities are regulated, some of those have been on the books since the early 1900s. And as we've seen new technologies and things like that, the statutes really weren't necessarily crafted with what we see today and the energy landscape. So it's challenging as new issues arise. How does it fit? And it's not just in the utility space. You see the same challenges, whether that's under the public records law or open meetings law. Nobody contemplated we'd be having Zoom meetings and, all the electronic documents that are out there. So managing the substantive area that's constantly in flux with a somewhat dated set of statutes certainly substantively can be challenging.
Got it. Interesting. And you touched a little bit on how you interact with each division at the PSC. And I wanted to see if there's anything else you want to say on that as well, but also tell us about the unique relationship you have with each of the 3 appointed commissioners at the PSC as well.
Sure. The role of the PSC attorneys, including me, is we are, our client is the commission. But before that, we also view our individual staff, division administrators, and commissioners as our individual clients. And so we really interact with them by recognizing what our role is. We're not the decision makers. Our role is to flag for the decision makers, whether that be the commissioners or the administrators, their options and their alternatives, and explaining to them, the pluses and the minuses and the risks to various courses of action. It's unique when we're working with the 3 commissioners because of the prohibitions on the open meeting law. The commissioners can't talk to one another. And I know people don't believe that, but if you just watch their facial expressions at an open meeting and hear them they're just as surprised as everybody else when they hear their colleagues' positions. So my role really then is it's even more important for me and the other staff to respect the individuality of the decision makers. We don't share information between the commissioners, but we're also there to be a sounding board, help them navigate sometimes what can be a very voluminous record, answer their questions, and help them support whatever decision they feel both the law and the record supports. And then obviously once the full body meets and there is a majority opinion, then our role becomes to support and defend that decision. So it's really very much of a kind of a collaborative environment. That's what I probably like the most about the Public Service Commission is all of us, I think, appreciate our role as advisors and not decision makers or advocates, and how much it takes such a team to assist the administrators as well as the commissioners on any given subject matter. The commissioners and administrators have access to engineers, economists, financial analysts, and it really takes a village, so to speak, to get to the decision making and having the insight of all of those subject matter experts. So it's really very enjoyable to be a member of that team. And then sometimes as the chief legal, or kind of trying to quarterback all of those different teams and making sure that again, we're getting the record that is needed for the ultimate decision.
That is one of the things I admire most about you, Cindy, is how dedicated you are to sort of the process, and sticking to the letter of the law and the prescribed duties at the PSC. So maybe that leads us to another question. What do you want the public to know about the process that is set up at the commission for the public to participate? If there's a rate case that may be impacting someone or a construction case, what is the process that's set up for public participation?
I'm really proud of the processes that the commission has developed. We have always, I think, been a little bit ahead of the curve in terms of having all of our documents publicly available on our electronic records filing system. So there is a very high level of transparency from the information that is available. And working in conjunction with that, we try to meet the public where the public is and evolve in that process and make our own internal process changes so that we can be maximizing the opportunities for the public to participate in our proceedings. So whether that be, originally it was all in-person, public hearings, but then as the internet and computers became more, providing that opportunity for people to submit comments via the website. Then it's evolved since the pandemic of, providing an option to be remote and having our hearings all via Zoom, and also having hybrid hearings where there's both in person as well as the opportunity. So there's a number of opportunities for the public to participate, and we try to explain the different parts of a process in which the public can participate. Depending upon the scope of the project and our obligations under WEPA, there may be specific comments dedicated just to the environmental components of the project, as our environmental analyst looks at the potential environmental impacts of a project and whether or not there's the potential for significant impact and whether an environmental impact statement has been done. So there's a role for the public to comment on those issues, but then there's also a role to comment just on the merits of a case, whether that be a rate case or a construction case or some other commission proceeding. And I think people don't appreciate that just because the commission may not call out Jane Smith's comment, that doesn't mean that the commission did not review and seriously consider all of the public comments. I I know that they read everything and they take that to heart. And sometimes it does, specific comments may get raised, but just because a public commenter submitted a comment online or went to a hearing, but then the commission doesn't maybe directly address their concern, it certainly doesn't mean that it wasn't considered. And I think that's an important point for folks to know is the commission does read the whole record and considers all of the arguments for and against, and then ultimately comes to its decision on what evidence it finds more persuasive.
Can we talk for a quick second about the process of a construction or rate case? Like, what are the steps in the process and how would the public know what they are?
Sure. First and foremost, every case that comes before the commission gets assigned a docket number, and that becomes your way of tracking that case throughout the process. So just like any court case number, it gets assigned its unique number. It usually starts, whether it's a rate case or a construction case, with the filing of an application, and there may be certain code or other legal requirements as to the substance of that application. So once the application is received, and if it's a construction project for a large energy infrastructure and it's deemed complete, the commission's first will open up a notice, and that will give people an opportunity to participate really in one of two ways. They can intervene and formally become a party to that proceeding, which gives them the ability to both ask, but also be subject to discovery, to cross-examine witnesses. And really, those are designed for more kind of expert type. Those are we call them technical hearings because they're very technical. Members of the public can certainly participate in that, but then they're held to those evidentiary standards and those procedural standards. And they can also forego being a party and just participate as a member of a public and give their personal opinions as to the application that's before it. So those are the two paths for participation. And then, as I said, there's a variety of ways, whether that's speaking at a hearing or submitting information via our online process to provide the information. But all of our documents, our notices really provide the roadmap as to how to participate. And we recently just redid our website, and staff did a great job with trying to make that a bit more user-friendly. And so there are menus that drop down and are guides to participation in the proceedings. And we try to have, for cases that we think are going to garner a lot of public interest, in particular construction cases, try to have a major case section on our website. And so all of the information about a specific case that the public may want is a little bit more neatly organized, because everything in a case gets filed on our electronic regulatory filing system, or ERF. And there can be a lot of documents in there, and it sometimes gets hard to navigate. But these sort of snapshots of the cases are really a good starting point for anyone that's interested in a case to learn more about it.
I agree. I think one of the easiest ways to follow something that you're interested in at the commission is that easy subscribe option, where if you go to the commission's website, and we'll link to this in the show notes, but if you type in that docket number, then you can get emails like once a day or once a week with all the documents that have been filed in a particular docket. And I do love the resource that you mentioned as well, sort of the, what do we call it, the hot topics, or the cases of interest before the commission. So whether it's rate cases, if a utility is filing to increase rates. Somebody asked me recently if the commission had ever decreased rates. And I was like, yes, I think pretty recently that's happened too.
Yeah.
And then if there's a construction case, such as a new solar project being developed in a township, you would go to that page and be able to find the docket numbers there so that you can follow. and see where to participate.
We really do try, even in cases that aren't sort of what I'll call the quasi-judicial, where there is a hearing requirement. Even for those cases that we think might be of interest, maybe there's a unique pilot program that the utility is proposing. Staff will do a memo that kind of analyzes the program, and we will put that out and we'll solicit comments on those types of matters too. So I totally agree. The best way to stay informed is if there are things you're interested in, getting subscribed to IRF so that you're getting those notifications. They'll also then, a recent upgrade we've made is people would always call me and say, is my matter on the open meeting agenda? And I don't honestly know until sometimes 48 hours in advance. What is going to be on the agenda and if all the commissioners are ready. So, well, now we have a process whereby once we have finalized the agenda and we make the required posting under the open meetings law, that too will upload to the docket. So you will know that your specific docket is on the agenda for the next open meeting.
So it sounds like in recent years, the commission is really looking to increase public participation in cases. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about how you've been making an effort to do more outreach to get increased public participation in cases?
Sure. And it's really kind of taken two forms. The current chairperson, Vach, has really been committed to doing what we call generic investigations. And what those are is, instead of having to examine a matter in a more contested environment, let's take a step back and first explore. So, for example, electric vehicles. Before we got into the details of specific utility programs, we took a step back and wanted to hear from people. What are your thinkings? What do you think the role of the commission should be in this new area? And so we've really done a lot more generic dockets that had sort of fallen out of favor for a while, but that has been renewed. And that really is more of an opportunity to be more collaborative, where you don't have a utility that maybe it's part of a rate case and maybe there's a rate increase. And so things can be more adversarial. Because there isn't a specific proposal on the table, it allows a lot more free flowing of information back and forth, because we typically, would maybe come out with some ideas flowing from that then would get incorporated into later utility filings, whether they be specific tariff filings or rate case filings. So that's been one process, kind of an old measure that has been dusted off and has really, I think, helped. And then the way in which we've tried to solicit, especially for those kinds of subject matters, is really doing more informal, whether they be listening sessions, whether they be kind of brainstorming sessions, and allowing a variety of experts, members of the public, to come and present their ideas, ask their questions in that non-adversarial environment. So that's something we've started. We recently, just with a few dockets, started with some listening sessions to first hear what some of the challenges are on affordability and things like that, so that then we can take that input on the front end. And as we're looking at other ideas as to how to design specific programs, as opposed to designing in a vacuum without hearing that. So it's certainly a new approach on these listening sessions. It may be something that we look at perhaps in other dockets and cases, but sometimes you have to be careful with those, because when there is like a rate case or a construction case, we want to be sure that people know at what part of the process they're participating. And sometimes if they participate in that beginning, they think, okay, I've stated my piece, and then they disappear from the process. And then they actually don't get to the part of the process where their comments on the merits are entered into the record. So you have to balance providing multiple opportunities for public involvement, but also with the right education of what is the point of that involvement and how will it be used and where will you need to continue to stay engaged to be able to comment specifically on the merits of a specific proposal.
I think I know the answer to this, but is the current process is statutorily outlined, right?
It is for the most part for the broad brushstrokes are outlined. So, for example, if there is a proposal that will result in an increase in rates or a diminishment in service, a hearing is required by law. Certain types of construction of utility infrastructure have a mandatory hearing requirement. So there's that. But then the agency is, and if, for example, if there's an EIS or other environmental, there's process requirements associated with those. But between that broad framework, there's a fair amount of discretion to solicit additional comments. I mean, yeah. I honestly think we go above and beyond the minimum requirements to give people an opportunity to be heard.
Well, thank you for that. I think it's encouraging what you're doing with the listening sessions to try to increase participation and sort of get a sense on the front end what some of the issues that the public might have would be.
It's really been encouraging to see just sort of the changing landscape of our participants. We have sort of those that are routinely before the commission, but it's been really refreshing to see other grassroots organizations or citizens groups sort of come together, united on a specific cause to participate. And so it's been nice to get that diversity. I think that the more information in the record, and the commissioners feel the same way, the better their decision-making process.
Absolutely. All right, Cindy, let's talk about some of the cases of interest that are before the commission right now or that may be coming up. Do you have any that you're following particularly closely?
Yeah, this is, as you might remember from your time at the commission, while everyone's out enjoying the summer, our auditors are now, neck deep in auditing the rate case filings. We have 3 utilities that are in for full rate cases. That's MG&E, Wisconsin Power and Light, and Northern States Power Company. So those are all in and in process with hearings coming up in the fall. So staff is just finishing kind of the audit work. The schedules have been set in those cases, so there'll be hearings probably in September, October for those cases. We've got, I think we always have a steady stream of solar projects that continue to come in, so those cases are out there for the public. And as I mentioned, these more generic type dockets, we've got a couple of open dockets where we're looking at, the affordability is becoming an increasingly challenging topic as we make this transition to more renewable energy. That does not come without a price tag. And so looking at ways and how we're dealing with the energy burden that are hitting some of those folks really hard. And are there more innovative rate structures or some type of performance-based rate making? So we do have some open dockets looking at low income potential new programs, as well as an ongoing generic docket, our roadmap to zero carbon, where we're also looking at affordability, but I think we'll also be looking more at demand response in the coming months here. But it's my favorite time of year with rate cases, as you might remember.
I bet. So you mentioned there's always a steady stream of solar cases coming in at the commission. And when I was there 10 years ago, that was not the case at all. Right. So I wanted to ask, how the energy generation landscape has changed since you first started at the commission and how that impacts the work that's being done there? Does that increase the number of construction cases under review? Just tell us more about how that change is impacting the work at the commission.
Yeah, it's, when I first started, all of the utilities were long on capacity, so they weren't really building anything. We were seeing kind of more of a influx of some transmission because if you have the generation, you still need a way to move it around. And so then, and you're right, renewable energy really wasn't on the forefront. We had just, as I started, we had just promulgated the wind siting rules. And so people were thinking, oh, okay, wind is going to be what we're going to do. And that never really took hold very strongly in Wisconsin. Some of that has to do with the capacity factor. Our wind isn't that great. And so then, and I think some of it was the economies, the solar, the technology wasn't quite there. So the economics didn't necessarily make sense. Well, as those economics have changed and the price of building solar facilities is becoming more and more competitive, and then you've now seen kind of the increase in load and demand. And so we're now on the other end of the cycle where the utilities are building a lot, have very ambitious goals to be carbon free. And so that is impacting the number of certainly construction filings. And then if you look kind of regionally of how we're going to then, with all of these solars, move some of that, I think you'll see another wave of transmission projects probably come through here in the next several years. And then we have the development of, EV has not had a huge uptake, but I think that's certainly on the horizon. And what does that mean then to the distribution system, and how are we going to manage that additional load? And so there's certainly been, in terms of impact of the commission's work, yes, a lot more construction, but then there's also the challenge of how do we deal with that in rates? And so we had a long period of time where utility rates were relatively flat. Then there was some tax cuts that was sort of found income or money that needed to go back to ratepayers. So we had some of those credits that absorbed some of those more normal increases. And now we're unfortunately starting to see, as the new projects are becoming in rate base, an increase in rates and how best to manage that.
And the thought is, with some of these projects that don't require a fuel source, over time, they'll be cost effective for customers, but on the front end, as construction is taking place, there can be a greater rate impact.
Right. And I think that, I think you hear this a lot of times at our open meetings, that you're still probably going to need some sort of, you can't necessarily, where we're at right now, hopefully we'll get to another place, but you might need more intermittent, when you have intermittent resources, you might still need some natural gas or other combustion sources that can ramp up or ramp down when the sun isn't shining or the wind isn't blowing. And so it's, again, that managing that transition as technology continues to evolve, but also recognizing that the utilities have an obligation that everybody wants their lights to turn on. And so they have to plan for that eventuality.
Yeah, especially the last couple days, as it's been, in the 90s, heat index over 100, and everybody just wants to stay cool.
Exactly.
And one other thing I just always note is that the cost increases that are happening right now, a lot of it is fuel based. So the cost of gas has increased significantly, and this is sort of a global trend. So it's not necessarily just the Wisconsin utilities that are experiencing these increased costs that will be passed on to customers.
Yeah, and you certainly start seeing also some of this, to your point about if we can get to a different fuel source that eliminates some of the supply chain issues that the utilities really struggled with in terms of getting the coal here on the rail cars and things like that, and the extra costs if that's not here, how they have to go to the market. And so there is a benefit, obviously, to transitioning to and not having those fuel costs because that is, as you noted, a pretty sizable chunk of utilities revenue requirement is still the fuel.
Yeah. Okay. And we touched a little bit on electric vehicles and like just the new technologies that have happened or, really come into play over the last 10 years with EVs and batteries. And there's just policy decisions surrounding those things that I think has been really smart that the commission has done some of that work in the generic dockets to sort of tease out some of those policy issues before they made their way into individual utility rate cases. Okay. So Cindy, what are some of the most memorable cases you've worked on in your time at the PSC?
It's hard to pick it's hard to pick just one because
more than one.
They're memorable for a number of different reasons. Obviously, sort of the big transmission cases are always memorable. They're memorable because of the size, the public engagement, and some creative public engagement on some of those. I will say a recent one that, and this is the hard part of our job, is what we do really is a public service, but nobody really likes what we do. They like having their lights come on and being able to charge their iPods, but they don't like it when we have to site a solar facility in proximity to their neighborhood, or we have to raise utility rates so that the utility can continue to provide reliable service. So those are hard and they're hard decisions, right? And the commissioners really have to weigh the public interest, and that always sometimes overrides certain individual interests to serve the greater public. And so it's not often that people like our decisions. And while we know that we're doing a public service, I'll say probably the one most memorable docket, and memorable for a whole host of reasons, was our COVID docket. So when the health emergency happened, the speed at which everything happened, it looking back on it was pretty remarkable. And it was the first time that it really hit home of the essential nature of the services. And so once the governor declared the health emergency, the commission really took swift action, and sort of the legal wonk in me, I got to use a statute that we hadn't used in a long, long time that is designed for emergencies, Wisconsin Statute 196.70. And we're able to take swift action to make sure that we weren't sure how long this was going to last, what the economic impact was going to be, how long people might be out of work. And by suspending a lot of rules and making sure that folks would have water, would have electricity so they could stay safely in their home, that was memorable, to react and be able to see how quickly we were able to react and the impact that all of that had in light of everything else that was going on. And really just how seamlessly then all of that sort of just transitioned to, operating remotely for a period of time. So that one certainly stands out to me. So it's one of those that it just felt more personal.
Yeah. I mean, thanks for the reminder. It feels like forever ago, 3 years ago, different time. We mentioned this at the beginning of the episode, but you have worked as Chief Legal Counsel at the Commission through 3 different gubernatorial administrations. Tell us about that experience and tell us how you've stayed this long. You're a political appointee.
Yeah, it's when I first took the job, it was a civil service job. And then it changed shortly after getting that civil service job to appointed job. And I think it's more reflective of the commission than me personally. The commission is really committed to the work that it does. And my role is to know what my part in that process is. And I'm not the decision maker. I'm not there, and nor is any of the staff there to advocate for a specific position that may be personally. As the Chief Legal Counsel, I have to maintain my objectivity, and I have to serve my client and provide them the best information so that they can make the decision that they want to make. And so I think it's that level of objectivity, understanding my role, as well as just the knowing where my lane is. And I think the agency as a whole knows where its lanes is and makes sound decisions based upon the roadmap that the legislature has given them, as well as then the factual record that gets developed.
Thanks, Cindy. That's a perfect answer.
And I think a lot too is reflective just of the commissioners. Yes, different governors appoint different commissioners, but I'm really proud at how, for the most part, how professional the deliberations at the commission are. They can disagree. They do disagree. And they can disagree even if they've been appointed by the same governor. People review the evidence, different factors, maybe weigh more heavily on one specific decision maker who may see the evidence and rely more on another piece of the evidence. And so the high degree of professionalism really starts at the top with the chairperson and the commissioners. And then I think that flows through to all of the staff and the respect that we all have for the different viewpoints and the different subject matter expertise and insights and skills that each of us bring to the table.
Well, I know for a fact that the staff has so much respect for you as well, Cindy, as sort of a stalwart at the agency. And so I think you should feel really proud of that as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Are there any other topics or anything that we may have missed that you wanted to discuss?
Again, I just really encourage people to subscribe to dockets, become involved. Your voices are heard. And I guess sort of a parting message is I wish that none of this is personal. The commission's decisions aren't personal. They deal with one another in a highly respectful manner. And I get that on some topics that are very personal to individual landowners or individual customers, and that passion comes through. But where the personal attacks and some of those things, all of us are just trying to do the best and make the best decisions we can. We know that they have consequences, but we're trying to balance all of those interests. And I just wish that people could appreciate that more and have that same degree of kind of respect and professionalism, and by all measure, have your voices be heard. But just because then we ultimately may not agree with you, it doesn't mean we were bad or wrong or things like that. It's just we have to look at a broader picture and a broader set of interests. And so I think that's really important for folks to know, that we know the passion that they bring, but also know that this is a tough job to be the decision makers, and we all work really hard to make the best decisions we can. And it's sometimes just discouraging when you kind of get attacked for decisions that were tough decisions, but at the end of the day, really did end up serving the public interest.
Thanks, Cindy. Okay, so maybe as we go into our last question to all of our guests, what would you do with all the power? Maybe you just answered that.
That would certainly be one, is just, it'd be great to see that level of civility and kindness and grace. But that unfortunately is not kind of where we're at. But that would certainly be it. On a practical matter, I'd love to see all of our staff get pay raises. I mean, they really, and we struggle with turnover because the work that is done at the commission is highly sophisticated work. It is in very high demand. We spend a lot of time kind of training staff, and then they get poached by the utilities. And staff, they have families that they have to support. And so I get the economics of it. I just wish that they could be compensated at the level that the high degree of professionalism that they all have and the true value that they bring to the state could be recognized. So pay raises for everybody.
Amen. I love it, Cindy. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. This has been so delightful.
Well, thanks for having me, Kristen. And I miss you each day.
I miss you too. Come back to the Electric Wire anytime, and I'll have to stop out to the commission as well.
That sounds good. Thank you.
Okay. Bye, Cindy.
Bye-bye.
Thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in. Please support our work. You can subscribe to the Electric Wire podcast if you haven't already, and you can follow us on Twitter at The Electric Wire. Thanks also to the members of the Customers First Coalition for supporting this podcast. Our members are Dairyland Power Cooperative, Madison Gas and Electric, the Municipal Electric Utilities of Wisconsin, WPPI Energy, the Citizens Utility Board, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers Local 2150, and the Wisconsin Electric Cooperatives Association. Thanks again for listening. We'll have a new episode next month.